Well, good morning. Welcome to our Sunday school class. We all have our quarterlies. Good. Page 55. We're on lesson 11, which means we have just two more lessons to this quarterly, and then we have a new quarter starting, and that suggests to me that it's almost summertime. What happened to 2018? It seems like it was just 1999, 3 weeks ago. Right? Goes too quickly. All right, our lesson has to do with the idolatrous worship of the calf. Our quarterly is following the Israelites from their bondage in Egypt through their deliverance. They have crossed the Red Sea, and they are now at Mount Sinai. And last week we saw that God descended on Mount Sinai and made a great demonstration of clouds and fire and sounds of trumpets and things of that nature. I tell you, I don't know if we have ever seen anything nearly as awesome as that. I can imagine in Hawaii right now, the Big Island, they're seeing some things that are close to it with the volcanic eruption and so forth going on there. I know in Oklahoma here, in springtime and early summer, we have a lot of excitement with the tornadoes and the demonstration of the atmosphere and things like that. There are really a lot of powerful things in nature and a lot of powerful things that people have made, but the demonstration of the presence of God that these people saw is unparalleled by anything in history. I think we have a word in our language that gets overused nowadays, but this was awesome. This was truly awesome. But before they got to Mount Sinai and saw the presence of God, backing up just a few weeks, they were out in the middle of a desert. 2 million people plus, animals, and so forth like this. No water. No water. Okay, again, in southwest Oklahoma, we appreciate water. We like the ponds and the pools and the creeks and the lakes and things like that. People need water. They have to have water to exist. And here they were, just out in this desert, no water. Animals were, mooing and braying and all the things that animals do, letting their people know that I'm thirsty. And babies were thirsty, and mothers were thirsty, and fathers were thirsty. And they began complaining to Moses, "You brought us out here to die. This is a desert." Well, God intervened again. And God told Moses, "Go over to that rock and take your staff and just hit that rock." And Moses did. And guess what? We'd expect that maybe the rod would break, hit that rock with that stick and it just break. But no, the rock opened up and water came out of this rock. Now, I don't think this was just some little pebble sitting on the ground. I mean, I think this was kind of like a big hill, kind of like Mount Scott out here, which is a big pile of rocks. Okay, and so God manifested his presence by miraculously bringing water into existence to take care of the needs of all these people. Well, back up a couple of weeks from that. They had just crossed the Red Sea, and they were hungry. And again, they were complaining to Moses, "You brought us out here to kill us, didn't you? We're hungry. We're going to die." Well, God intervened again. And God at night let something kind of just appear on the ground. And when the people woke up in the morning, they saw this white stuff on the ground. It wasn't snow, but they'd never seen anything like this. And so they said, "What is it?" Or in Hebrew, they said, "Manna." And that's what we call it nowadays. It was something that God caused to come into existence that was kind of like little wafers. And they could gather up these wafers and they could grind them up and they could make flour and make the bread and the things that they needed to have to eat. So again, God miraculously intervened. And don't forget, just a few days before that, they were at the Red Sea, and the Egyptian army was hot on their trail. And these people were not prepared in any way to fight a battle. What were they going to do? Yeah, people complained to Moses again. You brought us out here for the Egyptians to kill us. Well, God intervened. And God sent a strong east wind all night long. And that Red Sea parted. The land dried up. And all 2 million people and their livestock went across the Red Sea. And when the Egyptian army saw them, they took off after them. They got out there into the middle of the Red Sea on this dry land, and the wheels began to come off their chariots. And then when that happened, the water came back and the army was obliterated. Again, the intervention of God. Not to even diminish the thought of the plagues that these people saw in Egypt. So here they are now at Mount Sinai. And these several months that they had been traveling to this place, how many manifestations of the presence of God had they seen? Especially these last ones, where they're there at this barren, rocky mountain, and it's on fire, and there's smoke, and there's trumpet sounds, and God speaks. How many of us have actually heard God speak? Now, I know God speaks to us when in our hearts we hear God in that sense. But how many of us have actually heard with our ears God speaking from heaven? I think there are very few people living today that have ever had that experience. Perhaps none. Perhaps none. So these people, certainly these have got to be deeply committed believers, really consecrated to God and God's working. Well, God brought them all to Mount Sinai for a reason. One of the reasons was the giving of the 10 Commandments, which we talked about last week. And that was the demonstration of God there. And when God spoke, the people said, Moses, tell God not to talk to us. Let him talk to you and you tell us what God said, because it terrifies us to hear God. And so God said, Moses, come on up. So Moses, with a small group of men, the 70 men plus Joshua, started up. The men had to stop at a certain point, and Moses went the rest of the way up. What an experience for a human being still living at the time, because he walked into the very presence of God. And Moses said, God, I'd like to see you. And God said, well, no one can see my face. But you stand over there, I'm going to put my hand down here, and then I'm going to turn around, and you can see my backside. And that satisfied Moses. So God then gave Moses what we call the 10 Commandments. And the beautiful thing about this came directly from God, so much that God actually chiseled the words onto tablets of stone that he had carved out of the side of the mountain. There was no interpretation of Moses, no dictation on the part of Moses, but just these tablets of stone. Then God said, okay, Moses, get your pen and your steno book out because I'm going to give you the law. And he told Moses, you need to build a tabernacle, a tent. And this is going to be a place of worship. And he said, in this tent there's going to be an altar and a laver and table of shewbread and all these things. He laid it out. And he gave Moses the instructions for sacrifices and the various things that the Israelites were going to observe in their worship of God. The result, as far as the people standing down there around the mountain, was this took a long time. It was 40 days. 40 days. That is a miracle for Moses, because if you would go without eating and drinking water for 40 days, you'd be dead. So the physical circumstance of Moses being in the presence of God was miraculous in that he was not dead. And keep in mind, this is a man that's 80 years old. And if you've ever seen pictures of Mount Sinai, it's more rugged than our Mount Scott. And so this elderly man had climbed his way up there, hadn't eaten anything for over a month. He's got 2 tablets of stone. I don't know how much these tablets would weigh, but you know, you take a big chunk of rock like that, granted, that's got to weigh a lot. Steve, would you think, how much you think that would weigh? Like plenty, you said, okay. So, yeah, so here he comes down the mountain. Well, things are going on while Moses is up there. And sometimes this happens in our personal lives. Somebody is in the presence of God, and the rest of us are just kind of hanging out there. Sometimes it comes to church that way. Someone's really feeling close to God this day, and the rest of us just kind of, well, you know, I'm here. I punched the time clock. I came to church. We've all had those days, have we not? Let's be honest. And some of us, I mean, we've had some of those other days, haven't we? Let's be honest. We like those days better than the, okay. Well, these people are having a down day. In page 56 there, Exodus 32, verses 1, 2, and 3, describes what was going on with the people while Moses was up there with God. And when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down out of the mount, the people gathered themselves together unto Aaron, that's Moses' brother, and said unto him, Up, make us gods which shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we wot not what has become of him. Okay, why are these people so prone to disparage Moses? God had used this man to deal with Pharaoh and make possible their deliverance from Egypt. God used this man in whatever God did to part the Red Sea, to bring the manna, to bring the water. And now Moses was up there in the presence of God with all this display going on. And the people are saying, who is this guy anyway? What does he think he is? Who made him boss over us? You ever had a situation, work for some situation like that? Well, who made him boss over us? Brothers and sisters have this thing at home, if you've ever been a brother or sister. Who made you boss? Well, that's what they thought here. And they come to Aaron, and they knew there was a connection more than just Aaron being an older brother. Aaron was the one who did all the talking. So, and we know later that when the worship was set up, that Aaron and his sons were made the priesthood of the Israelites' religion there. So they come to him and they say, okay, we accept you as our religious leader, Aaron. So make us gods which shall go before us. And I'll comment a little bit more on that in just a moment, because there's perhaps more to that statement than what we think just from what we read. You know, the Israelites had been in Egypt for 400 years. They still had their religion in the traditions of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay, they had that. They knew about the promise that God made to Abraham and those things. But they had lived in this pagan culture for centuries, and it had paganized them to a certain degree. They still knew there was a real God. Hey, they'd seen what this real God can do. But they also had been affected by the paganism of the Egyptians, and there was this felt need for some kind of image or token to represent God in the people's minds. We'll talk about that a little bit more if I remember. If I forget, somebody tell me, okay? Verse 2, and Aaron said unto them, all right, break off the golden earrings which are in your ears of your wives and your sons and of your daughters, and bring them unto me. And all the people brake off the golden earrings which were in their ears, and brought them unto Aaron. So, what's wrong with this picture? The people wanted a representation of God, and Aaron obviously had some experience in whatever he did when he was in Egypt in working with gold. So he said, give me the gold. And he then, verse 4 says, and he received them at their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool after he had made it a molten calf. And they said, and notice they said, not Aaron, these be thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And when Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made proclamations and said, tomorrow is a feast to the Lord. Now notice that word Lord is all capital letters. That is the name of God, Yahweh. Okay? So Aaron is referring to Yahweh, Jehovah God, not some god of the Egyptians. So there is some religious confusion going on in the minds of all the people here. And Aaron is really kind of making a big contradiction, because he still is acknowledging Yahweh, and he's saying, okay, we're going to set aside a time to worship God and make an altar. And they rose up early on the morrow and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and to drink and rose up to play. They weren't playing baseball. This was a time of celebration. The people at this point had given up on Moses. He'd been gone for a month and a half, up there in the smoke and fire. Old man, starved to death. We'll never see him again. So they want a new dispensation of their religion. How about that? You know, we Christians, over the last 2 centuries, we've looked at the church and said, okay, well, that was the early church. Let's do it this way. And And then the Reformation came on and said, no, let's do it this way. Then there was the primitive church movement that began around 1800, and they said, no, let's do it this way. And now we are in a postmodern culture. Humanism, relativism has affected the church and a lot that's taught in the church. And, it's the same thing that's going on here. It just took us a little bit longer. These people, it took a month and a half. And so they want a new, more liberal, more visible aspect to their religion. So, Aaron, Mr. Priest, give us a God that we can see. Well, they saw the manifestations of God already, but yet they chose to have something made out of gold by Aaron that could do nothing. It couldn't part the water. It couldn't make manna come. It couldn't get water out of the rock. And it could not talk to them as Yahweh had just talked to them. So, the calf is not really a throwback to the Egyptian religion. They intended that this calf be a representation of God. Okay? And they're kind of saying we're redefining God in a way that we can understand God. And boy, I tell you what, that is going on around us right now in our city. Hey, there are good godly people out there, don't get me wrong. But I tell you what, there are churches where they are redefining God, redefining the faith, making it very human, very, very easy, can we say. Nobody's bad, nobody's good. God loves everybody and everybody goes to heaven kind of thing. And kind of do what you want and there's no rules. We have Pinocchio Christianity nowadays. Pinocchio Christianity? Yeah, no strings on me. Well, you know what Pinocchio did? He lied a lot. Okay, and you remember what happened when he lied? Okay, sad to say, when our brethren around us start teaching lies and lifting up a golden calf instead of the Yahweh God who's there, there's going to be some kind of evidence and some kind of proof of it. And when that becomes real, there's going to be people that are going to be hurt. And I tell you what, I have evidence in what I did over this past week and put another article on Facebook, and I got some responses that just will break your heart. There are people in this city that are in church. They are really, really hurting because somebody's lifting up a golden calf and saying this is Yahweh when it can do nothing. So that's where these people are. Okay? Verse 7 on page 57, and the Lord said to Moses, Go, get thee down, for thy people, which thou broughtest out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. Wow. Here, Moses has been in the glorious presence of God and saw the hand of God writing the Ten Commandments and has been given the law, the instructions to build the temple and the ceremonies and so. I mean, he's been kind of in heaven on earth, just having a great time with God. And all of a sudden God says, Go, get thee down, and listen to this. For thy people, and listen, which thou broughtest out of the land of Egypt, come on in, John, have corrupted themselves. It's like he's saying, Moses, it's kind of your fault. Sounds like it, doesn't it? But that's not really what's being said. He's just saying, look, there's a problem down there, Moses, and I'm sending you down there to deal with this problem. Well, there's 12 verses in between. Moses comes down, meets Joshua and the 70 elders, and they come down. Verse 19 says, and it came to pass, as soon as he came nigh unto the camp, that he saw what? The calf. The jig's up. I don't know if people say that anymore, but when I was a kid, we'd say that. Okay. There's a calf. And what else? And the dancing. That's why holiness churches are against dancing, aren't they? I guess, I don't know. But, you know, I mean, these people were having a heyday. They were having a whoopee-doo church service down here. I mean, they're just jumping around, you know. I mean, have you ever seen Oriental people? You know, they get excited about their religions. And, you know, King David, remember when they brought the Ark of the Covenant back to Jerusalem? He was out there. I mean, he was dancing. He was carrying on. And, you know, remember his first wife looked down and she was rather disgusted with him and said, hey, man, look, you're the king, and what you did's beneath being king. And David said, no, because I'm just rejoicing and worshiping God. Well, here people, they have got this image, and they are identifying the God who is there with this image. And I tell you what was the first commandment that God gave to Moses? Thou shalt have no other gods before you. And what was the second command? Thou shalt make no graven image. Well, in the minds of the people, they're saying, well, you know, this represents God. This is not some false God. And it's just something to remind us. Okay? I'm going to say some things that may be going to be difficult for people to grasp. You can go to a Christian bookstore and you can buy crosses. I mean, pins and necklaces, big ones, little ones, got diamonds on them, rubies and all kinds of things. You can find little statuettes of praying hands. You can find paintings and pictures of Jesus, and you can find all kinds of crosses and things like that, decorations. All right? What about these things? Now, I'm not against a cross. I'm not against a picture. But you know, sometimes people look at that picture, look at that cross, kind of like a golden calf. You know, there's some people, they wear a cross because they believe it brings them luck or it protects them from something. You know, there's some homes in the world where they have pictures of Mary on the wall and a little shelf right under that picture, and they'll take food and they'll put it up there to the picture as an offering to Mary, the mother of Jesus. You know, we have to be careful with the things, decorations that we use. Now, don't go tell people that I've preached against decorations, because I'm not preaching against them. I'm saying be cautious, be aware. What is it? If you go into my home, you'll find, you know, little doodads on the walls with crosses and praying hands and stuff like that. We don't worship them. They're not good luck charms. It's just indications, symbols of Christianity. You know, they mean nothing to me. But some people, that cross that they hang on the wall, it's not just a decoration, not just something that identifies them as a Christian. They think that somehow there's a contact with God in that piece of jewelry, that piece of artwork. Well, there's not. The Hebrews, they said, these are your gods. Well, that's not our God. Now that's not Jesus, that's a shepherd. But when you see that picture, you think of Jesus, don't you? Okay. Yeah. Well, we don't come down and bow down and worship to the picture. It's just a picture. It reminds us of the Good Shepherd. It evokes some scripture to our mind that teaches some things about Jesus. There are churches that have stained glass windows. Aren't they beautiful? And they're usually pictures of something like this in the Gospels or in the Bible to remind us. But there are people that when they go into a cathedral or a church like that, they actually show reverence to those stained glass windows. There's a difference in showing reverence to something and then letting it remind you of a passage of Scripture. You get the idea what I'm talking about here? Okay. So don't make something out of what I've said that's not there. But just remember, we worship the God who is there. Okay? And the greatest reminder for us as Christians, since being born again, we have the very presence of God in us. We don't need an idol. We have God in us. So that's powerful enough. So Moses came down, and as soon as he came close by the camp, he saw the calf out there. And he saw the people dancing and having this great and wonderful church service. And the Bible says, Moses' anger waxed hot. He did not like what he saw. He had just walked out of the presence of the real God and came down watching God's people worshiping and rejoicing around an image that they wanted to represent their God. Moses, he's got it right there on the stone tablets. Thou shalt make no graven image. And he is angry. And the anger, I don't believe, was the personal anger of Moses as much as it was the anger of God that was coming through him. We talked about the love of God and how the love of God is to be shown through us. Well, here's a situation where the anger of God was being shown through Moses. And it doesn't say that he said anything. He's just there. And he takes the tablets that are in his hands and he throws them down and they shatter into pieces. Very vivid picture that, okay, God has just given you this law of the Ten Commandments and you have just broken them. Verse 20, it didn't stop there. He took the calf which they had made and burned it in the fire, ground it to powder, strawed it upon the water, and made the children of Israel drink of it. Wow. I don't understand how that happens and why it happens so much. But there were many of the people that did not participate in what happened. And God said, you people, go out there and you kill those that committed idolatry. and 7,000 were killed. Brother Weindorf makes a very valid point there in the middle of page 58. About 3,000 were killed. Sin has serious consequences. You don't mess around with sin. Don't mess around with God. God is not this mushy-gushy God that modern Christians want to believe in. God is still a God of righteousness, a God of holiness, a God of standard. Yes, He is a God of love, but that love is to draw people to Himself, to make people like Himself, not to tolerate sin, not to even let sin go on. Sin has consequences. And I mean, that's for everyone. Christians that are careless with sin sow things into their lives that they are regretting. Sin is a bondage. And the bondage, especially for Christians, is not so much the bondage to do the sins, but the bondage of spirit that tells them they have to do this. They have to do this. Okay, verse 30. And it came to pass on the morrow that Moses said to the people, "You have sinned a great sin." Let me tell you, any sin is a great sin, big sin. There's no little sins in the mind of God. "And now I will go up unto the Lord. Peradventure I shall make atonement for your sin." Here we see a picture of Christ and the great love of God that made atonement for sin. Verse 31, and Moses returned unto the Lord, and he said, listen, this will break your heart. Oh, this people have sinned a great sin and have made them gods of gold. Yet now if thou wilt forgive their sin, and he stops. And it flashes into mind the greatness of the sin that these people have committed after seeing the mighty presence and power of God. And he says, and if not, blot me, I pray thee, out of thy book which thou hast written. I mean, this causes me to cry. Moses loved these people because they were the chosen people of God. And God says, look, I'm going to exterminate them. And Moses says, no, take me instead. What do we see in this? Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Lord, Father, take me instead. If it be thy will, let the cup pass, but if not, your will be done. Okay, God's anger had been displayed through Moses, and now the love of God was shining again through this man, Moses. And then verse 33, and the Lord said unto Moses, whosoever hath sinned against me, him will I blot out of my book. This tells us that sin is always an individual thing between a person and God. There may be the corporate sin of the people with this false god, but God didn't look at the sin of Israel corporately. He looked at the sin of this man, this woman, this person, that person individually. Okay? You cannot say, okay, God, yeah, I did it, but he also did it and she also did it, as if that somehow ameliorates the consequence of your sin. No, you are personally accountable for your sin, no matter how many people either did it or did not do it along with you at the same time. No one can stand before God and say, God, look at him, look at her. All that's going to be there is you, God, and the record. Let me tell you, dear ones, you want that record that God reads out of when you're standing before him in judgment to be the Lamb's Book of Life. Oh, I see your name. Enter into the joy of the Lord. The others, every deed, every sin, and they will remember. They will remember. And they will remember that sometime in their life they read a tract, they read some verses from the Bible, they heard a sermon, a friend shared the gospel with them. But now they had turned aside God, and they are facing a lost eternity in a place the Bible calls hell. You know, Jesus described it as a place where there's fire and their worm does not die and things like that. But what is hell really like? What is a place where there's all kinds of people and no God? Friend, it's not a place that you don't want to go. You know, we have the presence of God in the world today, but there are a lot of evil, wicked people, right? How many of us lock our doors at night? Why do you do that? Well, because there are wicked, evil people. How about being in a place for eternity where the door won't lock and you have no protection? Scary, scary thing. So, God's serious about our relationship with him and our worship. Next week, our lesson, the 12th lesson, the presence of God. And that's going to be a good and happy lesson, a lot happier than this one. We're dismissed.